We are talking up the Buckeyes here at the Voice of College Football. We're just about halfway through spring practice. We got Pat Murphy on the line. Always good to hear from Pat. You can catch his work on Bucknuts on 247 Sports. Hey, Pat, what's going on?
Not much, Mark. Good to talk with you.
Absolutely. And I got to think, the other day we did our Buckeyes live show with Steve and the gang, and anytime I hear the name Jim Knowles, I got to think, man, every time this guy meets in front of the media, sure, there's all sorts of different questions, but the underlying theme has to be, is this defense getting fixed? He's got to be kind of sick of hearing that to a certain extent. And again, I know it's veiled through the various types of questions that are being asked, but that's what all Buckeye fans are wanting to know. Is this defense being worked on?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's kind of a deja vu of last year at this time, except we're talking about what Jim Knowles' defense did in 2022 as opposed to what a not Jim Knowles defense did and how you fix that. So it's been interesting. I think look, the defense was far from perfect last year, but if we look at what the Buckeyes did, yes, it was against teams that didn't have great offenses for most of the season. But if you compare that to the year before, there were definitely strides made. And I think even in the big games, you go to the Michigan game in particular, and it was big plays, right? And Jim Knowles' philosophy is 5 or fewer big plays, and you can still win. You can still go undefeated. I think that needs to change. I think that's the biggest thing that needs to change from his philosophy on defense. Maybe that worked when he was coordinating the defense at Duke. Maybe that worked at Oklahoma State, where, if you can limit those big plays in a conference that's a lot of big plays, then you're probably doing all right. I don't think that works. I mean, it can work in the Big Ten for the most part, but when you get into some of those, as they call them, matchup games, Michigan, Georgia, look, even Maryland's offense last year put up a good amount of yards on them. I
Penn
don't think
State.
that philosophy, Penn State, that's true. I don't think that philosophy works as well. So that's where I think Jim Knowles needs to change. As for the rest of the defense, I think a lot of it was just year one. And look, I think you have 2 new coaches aside from Jim Knowles in Tim Walton, who's coaching the cornerbacks and overseeing the secondary, and Perry Eliano, who's the safeties coach. So they're coming in, they're learning Jim Knowles' defense while also teaching Jim Knowles' defense. Jim Knowles is learning his players, his coaches. And I think if you've looked at Jim Knowles' track record, it gets better usually each year. And so I have confidence that year 2 will be better than year 1. I think the question is how much better, and in the games that really matter, how much better. Because look, if you want to put it on the defense, I think it's fair that they didn't win the Big Ten because of this defense. The offense was certainly capable of winning the Big Ten. The offense was certainly capable of beating Georgia. And the defense showed bits and pieces in that game, but it wasn't sustainable throughout that fourth quarter. And especially, again, a big play that kind of changed the course of the game on that 75, I think it was, yard pass. So I do think there's reason for optimism. We can get into some of the players that I think will help that. But I think a big thing is that this will be year 2 of Jim Knowles' defense, and everybody is now a year more experienced in that defense, in that scheme. And I think that's going to be pretty helpful.
Yeah, so giving up 45 and 42 points in the 2 most important games of the year is not satisfactory in terms of the results. That's just the bottom line result. How many points did you give up? Well, with the yardage totals. But to be fair about it, again, this isn't the complete narrative, but there is something to his defense that Michigan was not gashing them for 6 yards a carry, 8 yards a carry over and over and bludgeoning them down the field. For 90 some percent of the plays of that game, Ohio State's defense did the job. Just can't give up those kind of big plays. And to your point about Duke and Oklahoma State, it's that, when you're recruiting 3 stars and that's the bulk of your defense, then that should be the concept. Yeah, let's limit the plays. Let's understand we got a good offense and we'll win these games 35-31. But when you're tripping over top 100 players coming out of high school every time you turn around, and those are the guys you're working with, then the goal should be a little bit different.
Yeah, and I think there has been a shift in the way Jim Knowles is thinking about things. And the most recent example when we've spoken to him came this past week. He was asked about the jack position, which has been a big deal, that hybrid defensive lineman linebacker spot that didn't go well last year. And frankly, they're not even really diving into it this spring. Somebody asked him, do you even need, like, is that a position of need when you're at Ohio State and you have the type of players you just referenced, as opposed to Oklahoma State, where you could probably find that 3-star guy who's athletic and can do a lot of different things and understands the game, and maybe that changes your defense. And he said, maybe not. Maybe we don't need that guy. He's not saying they will go away from it entirely, but that it's not as much of a necessity at Ohio State. And I think if you would have asked Jim Knowles that a year ago, he would have told you that's absolutely a key part of his defense. So I think it's recognition from him on what you can do with the guys that you can get at Ohio State, because he's never had the ability to, go from 5-star to 5-star, 5-star to 4-star before. This hasn't happened. So I think you're seeing a bit of a shift from him, not only in that's just my most recent example, but realizing, okay, things have to be different at Ohio State than in my past. And I think that's a positive sign. You'd rather have that than a guy who is stubborn and, this is how I've always done it. This is how we're going to keep doing it, even when it's clearly not worked at Ohio State. So positivity, I guess, from that perspective.